Welcome to the Her Empowered Divorce Live show on WGSN-DB Going Solo Radio Network. I'm your host, Beverly Price. I am the empowering divorce coach who guides women on their journey before, during, and after divorce to eliminate pain, overwhelm, sadness, and anger, and create more knowledge, skill, and happiness than I have experienced myself. My goal is to empower you from the moment you are considering divorce to confidently move forward in your divorce process, manage your emotions, avoid common mistakes, and ultimately create a happy and fulfilling life. Did you know that 1 out of every 3 women has been or is a victim of domestic violence and abuse? Of those, a shocking 98% have experienced financial abuse, and it's the number one reasons victims stay in or return to abusive relationships. Yet 78% of Americans don't think financial abuse is domestic violence. Well, I have a very special guest today who's going to shed light on this topic, and her name is Lisa Zeiderman. Lisa is a divorce attorney who's going to help us understand what goes on in financial abuse and what are ways to prevent and stop it so we can reduce the devastating effects. Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for being my guest today.
Hi, Beverly. This is such a great conversation that we're about to have, so I'm real excited to be here.
Such an important topic. I think let's start off with what is financial abuse and how do you identify it? Let's get to the basics so people can understand and recognize it.
So I think that the best way to understand financial abuse is that it is a type of control that one person
Oh,
exerts over another person. And the way that they do that is they don't allow them to move around in the world, essentially. They cut off their credit cards. They may not let them look at tax returns. They don't stop sharing their passwords to accounts. They may put them on a very stringent allowance. There are many different ways that it happens, but essentially they make them almost like a hostage. And it becomes a situation where it is abusive. And you're so right. Your statistics are so right on, because it is absolutely a form of domestic violence.
it is so shocking. And I think the interesting thing is that a lot of women go through it but don't even realize they're being abused. They come to me, they come to attorneys, and it's time to gather financial information, and you find out that they have no access. They have never seen a tax return other than to sign it. They don't have access to any of the savings accounts or investment accounts or mortgage statements. And so what should they look out for, and how do you share with a woman who's gone through this that she's in fact being financially abused when she's totally oblivious to it?
Well, look, it's very hard to point this out to people that they actually are being abused in some way, because there is a situation where they do deny it. And sometimes, in fact, we have found that the breadwinner in the family is the one who's being abused, believe it or not. And
Interesting.
that, we have seen that more and more in the last year. I've probably had at least 5 cases where that is the situation, where the main breadwinner of the household is turning over the money to the other person and then being put on an allowance, not being given the access to the accounts, not being told how they're actually being invested, and not being given transparency into the finances. And so it is a frank conversation that you do need to have with someone when they come to me and they say to me, I haven't seen the tax returns, but my spouse just signs them for me, or he puts them in front of me and tells me to sign them and I haven't seen them. And, we ask the hard questions. Well, did you call the accountant? If they're joint tax returns and an accountant is preparing them, are you aware of the fact that the accountant is supposed to be answering to both of you, not just your spouse,
Oh,
right? And so we start to ask these questions. Do you have access to any of the accounts? And if not, have you started your own account? Now, it may be that the person is not working at all, And it may be that the person can't work, for example, and this is the most horrific to me, is they can't even work because they don't have the money for the child care, because their spouse will not
Wow.
give them any money for childcare so that they could go out and look for a position or look for a job or get to a job. Their source of transportation is cut off or limited. So, they are literally, they're prisoners. And so we do ask those very same questions. And of course, in New York, and I imagine that there's similar affidavits or statements that people have to make, we give them what's called a statement of net worth. And they need to fill out that statement of net worth with all of their expenses and all of their assets and liabilities. Now, many of them, that's a shocker, right? Because they really get
Yeah.
to that point that they just don't have that information. And some of them get very upset. I mean, because it is such an important document and they feel that they are less than because they can't fill it out. And so we work with them. And usually my paralegal will work with them and try to actually go through it with them. What do they know? What do they not know? Do they go grocery shopping? Can they figure out how much in groceries they're paying every week so that at least we can get some sort of an average? Do they have
Right.
any idea where there are accounts? And some of it is like a needle in a haystack.
Absolutely. And I would think you touched on it a little bit about how this makes them feel. If particularly, let's say that breadwinner is extremely educated, very successful business wise, has, high intelligence, to then have this happen to them, I would think the reaction is, how could I be so stupid?
That is unfortunately the reaction. And look, it may take many sessions of therapy. We do suggest that people go into therapy and that they work with a therapist if they're not already doing so, to figure out how to move forward from this. Because you're right,
Mhm.
there's a lot of shame, frankly, in this.
Right.
Whether you're the breadwinner or you're not the breadwinner, there is a lot of shame associated with this type of abuse. And I think with abuse generally, physical and verbal abuse, that people are somehow allowing this to happen in their minds, that they've allowed this, that they are
Right.
therefore the person who is at fault when they're not at fault. They are the survivors of this. And so it's really important that they realize that that they can overcome this and that they should not be ashamed or feel humiliated, because there are so many people in the same situation.
Yeah, it's horrendous how many people are in this situation. It's terrible. So if you're in this situation and you're moving forward with a divorce, what questions should you ask a divorce attorney?
Well, so one of the things that you need to ask the divorce attorney is, how are you going to find out what my spouse's assets, liabilities, what our true expenses are, right? Because if you don't have the information, how is your divorce attorney going to go about it? Now, the
Exactly.
answers are discovery, depositions, perhaps. There's lots of ways to go through that, but that should be a question. How long is it going to take? What are the costs involved in actually doing this? How do we deal with with our children as we're going through this, if that's the situation? And how do I tell my spouse, who I feel that is abusing me, how do I tell my spouse that I'm going to leave this marriage? That is a very big question that people have.
Yes.
And they're afraid sometimes to actually do that.
Yeah, and it can be very risky to them. I think in any form of abuse, what's absolutely critical, and we do have the National Domestic Violence Hotline number to be posted there. But it's absolutely incredibly important that you talk to a domestic violence expert and have a safety plan before you even tell your spouse, because there's a significant number of women that have incredible harm done to them or even murdered at that point. So you do need expert advice, not just a caring friend who's well intentioned, but someone that knows specifically what could and is happening. I think that's real important.
Yes, and I think that having that caring friend or that family member or that therapist or someone in your life who you can trust and who you can, essentially bounce ideas off of and have these discussions is really important. But you're right. You need to make sure that you have a good plan in place and that it's a safe plan for you before you do anything.
Can you give us some examples, obviously anonymous and to not break confidentiality, of some situations that you've seen that people might be able to relate to or recognize?
Sure. So, I mean, we talked about one where spouses, are literally going out, earning the money, and then handing over their money to their spouse, and they are
Right.
required to do this, and then they are put on some sort of an allowance. Years and years ago, I had a potential client come in, and she literally had no car, no access to car, could not get groceries, had a young child, was put on such a tight and stringent allowance that it was impossible for her to get and do anything in life.
Wow.
And she had come from a foreign country, and she was just really eventually we recommended some of the services out there so that she could actually get help. But those are good examples. There's also that wonderful show, I will say, and I often go back to it because I think it so depicts this financial abuse situation, which is that show called Made. And I think it's a Netflix show.
Yes.
It really is a show about a woman who went through this. It's a true story, and then was able to write about it and obviously made her way in the world. But because she did not have funds, because she didn't have a job at the beginning, because her husband actually was an alcoholic in the show, and he would drink and then he would physically, violate her, and he would abuse her. And of course, part of it was that she couldn't leave because she didn't have the funds to do that. And you see this horrendous situation where she can't even pay for childcare, which is what I had mentioned, and how
Right.
she's going to go about doing that. So these are realities because it takes money to move around in the world, and if you don't have access
Yeah.
to it, it's not good.
It seems like some of these spouses that are the controlling ones, even if you requested the information, they would be not, not enthusiastic about providing it and could stall and whatever. What's actually that process look like?
So it is a long process, and we see it quite a bit. And the discovery process in a divorce is probably what takes the most time and, frankly, costs the most money. Look, if people were cooperative and they just would hand over their documents and they were honest about their assets and their liabilities, and they actually accurately portrayed them on a statement of net worth from the beginning, life would be a lot easier for everybody, and the legal fees would be a lot less. So doing discovery, one of the things that I was just talking about last week was that we usually send out our discovery notices, and then sometimes we get nothing back. And then the question is, what do we do next? Now, sometimes people have those breadcrumbs, and those breadcrumbs are very, very helpful because they may, point us to a bank account or a credit card that they may have seen. And we can then subpoena those credit card companies or those financial institutions to get the ball rolling and to start to see the documents, because usually one breadcrumb will lead to the next breadcrumb. And so if you get that, American Express, for example, statements, and then you can see, well, it's been paid through the Chase Bank, or it's been paid through somebody else, or this person has 3 other people on their card and they're paying for other people that they shouldn't necessarily be. So these are all the breadcrumbs that we put together. It's like a puzzle. And sometimes it really takes time to put that puzzle together. People need to be patient, though, because if they don't have the information, it's going to take longer. And if they want a full understanding of their finances, which they have an entitlement to and should have, then it's going to take some time and it's going to cost some money too.
Now, there's different kinds of divorce, right? There's mediation, there's litigation, there's pre-litigation settlement. When somebody's being financially abused, what what form of divorce is most commonly used, and can mediation be used in that case?
I think it's very tough to use mediation when you're being financially abused because you're essentially sitting in a room or a Zoom or however it's done, right, with this person who is abusing you. And you've been put against the wall essentially because you are feeling all of the stresses from not having access to funds. Now, during a litigated divorce, sometimes what we can do is to get you access to funds. So there's something called pendente lite support, which is temporary support. And your lawyer can make an application to the court to get temporary support, to get temporary legal fees, expert fees, whatever is needed. Now, sometimes it's not enough. And sometimes you could get turned down. There's always that risk. But usually you will get some form of temporary relief so that you can support yourself and your children and go through the process with somewhat of an equal playing field.
In those cases where someone doesn't have access to the money, how can they afford an attorney to help them?
So there are services that they can go to. So, I think you and I had discussed early on, I am part of an organization, a not-for-profit called Savvy Ladies.
Hmm.
This is a wonderful organization that has a free helpline where people can call up and ask that their financial questions be answered with a financial professional, and they get paired one-to-one to do that. It's a great organization. There's also other organizations. Usually there's a legal aid organization in the area, or you can go directly to the courthouse and see how you can get pro bono counsel. These are all ways that you can get some help. You also may approach family or friends and take a loan to get yourself started. And of course, it's
Gotcha.
good if you have that safety account so that you maybe can save for that, retainer so that you can get yourself started as well.
And maybe at the end of the broadcast, you could share that hotline number to Savvy Ladies with us. I think
Absolutely.
that would be
Absolutely.
great. Um, so this is just such a painful topic in some ways, because you think about, you could just be going along thinking you were doing all of the things you were supposed to be doing in a marriage. The marriage ends, and then the shock starts, where you find out all of this information that you didn't know of because you've been cut off from the finances. It seems like it would be a real devastating blow.
It is a very big, devastating blow. I think that people are sometimes shocked sometimes they're shocked in a good way, right? They didn't know they had all these assets. Their spouse may have been telling them that there was no money whatsoever, or they never had access to that money and only their spouse could actually be spending it and utilizing it and investing it.
Right.
So sometimes it's a good shock. Sometimes, of course, they find out that they have home equity loans on their house that they didn't know about, or second mortgages, or that the mortgage wasn't paid off at all, or that their house is literally headed into foreclosure. So, of course, it is shocking. But look, you have to have the information in order to make your next move in life. You can't just, unfortunately, bury your head in the sand. You have to actually understand what the facts are so that you can go from there.
To jump back a minute, I just had another thought when we were talking about mediation and litigation. If you're going toward mediation, can you still subpoena documents? Can you still get documents? Or is that something that you have to be in the legal/litigation process to do?
So sometimes you can get what's called authorizations. And so in mediation, you can ask your spouse to sign an authorization, giving you the right to get the information from the accounts. You won't have the power to subpoena because you won't have an action started. But you could do it that way, get these authorizations. Look, I do think that if there's a form of abuse, whether it be physical, emotional, or financial, I don't think mediation is necessarily the place to be. I think that is a very hard place to be because you already are being manipulated in some way. and you're
Right.
already being controlled in some way. And you really need an advocate at that point. And a mediator is more of a situation where you're sitting in the room and you need to be advocating for yourself. And if you
Exactly.
haven't been able to do that up to now, or you're afraid or fearful of what's going to happen when you leave that mediation session, then it's likely not the best place for you to be at that point.
Absolutely. And typically, I would advise clients, potential clients, to contact a divorce coach, the first step in the process. But in the case of abuse, if you can't talk to a divorce coach, the first person I would talk to is an attorney, because I
Yes,
think it's so absolutely critical to get the help you need.
I agree with that. I think
Actually,
that's true.
I'd preface that with calling the domestic violence hotline and then speaking to an attorney,
Yes.
because you want to make sure of lots of things. Like, you want to make sure that your phone calls can't be accessed. You want to make sure that your computer searching can't be accessed, because sometimes the abusers are so skilled at navigating computer information, phone information, that they can find out you're talking to an attorney, or they can find out you're doing things without you realizing it. So you have to be
100%.
very, very careful of
A
that. You'll
100%.
even see on the hotline when you go that there's a screen that pops up and says, if your computer is not safe, get off now, or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, that's very important.
Yeah. So if we go back, and I'm thinking about a situation where I was the breadwinner in the family, and we've talked about these women that are breadwinners that turn over all of those finances. Are there anything specific to them that they need to be on the lookout for?
Well, I think that the most important thing that they need to be on the lookout for is the fact that they don't have access, that they're not being given the passwords. Why turn over this money that you are earning now? You have the control, right, when you're earning the money. And if you're feeling so fearful that you feel like you're being trapped into turning over these funds, okay, every week after you get your paycheck, then you really need to be seeing someone about this. You need to be seeing a therapist so that you feel that you're in better control, or being able to call the helpline that you have been discussing, Beverly, because I think this is so important. I think you have to really understand that abuse is really, it's coercion, and it is coercive control over your life, and you don't want to give someone that control.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think sometimes, and this is definitely not all the time, but someone who is a breadwinner who marries someone else may have issues with self-esteem, just like all women do. Self-esteem, self-worth, those kinds of things. And that can contribute to their not pursuing to get that information from the spouse, just completely turning it over.
Uh,
I lost you again.
Not, can you hear me now, Beverly?
Now I
Yes.
can.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is 100% correct.
Yeah. Okay. Um, why why do you think everyone should get a prenup? Because I know a lot of people avoid that. Is this a tool that can really help you in preventing financial abuse or reducing the effects, or
So I am a very big fan of prenups. And I think that what prenups do, in my mind, is they lay the groundwork for transparency. So if you actually are able to work through a prenup with your soon to be spouse, that is a good sign that you're going to be able to have these financial discussions together. That's the first sign, right? And if you're not able to do that, if you can't be transparent, if your spouse is not, future spouse is not being transparent about assets, about tax returns, about income, that to me is a very big signal. It's a warning signal. It should be like a red flag, right? That this is going
gotcha?
to be a problem. So that's number one. Number two, the prenup can really protect particularly the non-moneyed spouse. And I know that that is the opposite of what most people think. But the fact is that it can protect the non-moneyed spouse because you can negotiate terms for yourself in the prenup that actually allows you to make sure that you're safe later in terms of this.
Gotcha. Such a great idea. I know that my husband and I got a prenup, and I feel like, some people go into it and they say, well, if I get a prenup, that's almost like thinking I'm going to get a divorce. But I actually think it's more preventative medicine so that you don't, by having everything kind of out on the table.
That is 100% correct. You really want to make sure that everything is there, that you understand what the finances are, that you understand what each of your responsibilities is going to be. And the prenup allows you to do this.
Absolutely. So let's say I realize, I kind of, after listening to the show, I realize that I'm actually being financially abused. What should I do? What action should I take if I'm like hit with the, oh my God, I'm being financially abused? What are my next steps?
So your next steps would be, I think, to actually speak to a therapist, speak to an attorney, speak to a coach like yourself, Beverly. And talk about this honestly with these people, because these professionals can actually help you to determine what your next steps should be. It may be that you're not just being financially abused, that you're being abused in other ways. And as a result of that, you may need to get, for example, an order of protection. You may need to get yourself into that courthouse to do that. You may need an order of protection for your children. So all of these kinds of things that you can actually start to think about and start to work with a professional is so important. And if you can go and be honest and transparent about what your situation is, you can get the help that you need.
Yeah. And that's so hard, I think, sometimes with a person's ego, is to really admit they need the help.
I think
but it is so,
that
so
that is
important.
100% true. And look, I think, as I said, we talked about the shame and the humiliation of it, and I think that there's no question, okay, that nobody likes to feel that they have let themselves be put in that situation, right? Everybody feels an embarrassment or shame, but there are so many people who are in this situation who will share their situation with you also. And there are groups of people who you can actually go to. There's another organization, I believe in, for example, in Westchester County called Hope's Door, which specializes in domestic violence. And in fact, Savvy Ladies is doing a program with them. There's lots of ways to get help and lots of ways to get yourself out of this situation.
Gotcha. So I like to ask all of my guests to help us with some action steps for people. What 3 actionable tips would you suggest to people kind of around this topic of financial abuse?
Okay, so the first thing is, of course, get the prenup. Then you actually know right away whether you are going to have financial transparency. It's great to have these financial discussions early on with your future spouse and to be able to talk with transparency, with honesty, and with truth about what your finances are and what each of your expectations are during the marriage. If you actually are already married and you're having these issues, you might consider a postnuptial agreement. Not all states recognize postnuptial agreements, but in New York we do. And they are very useful in terms of negotiating how money is going to be divided and spent and all of those wonderful things. If you feel obviously that you are being physically or emotionally or financially abused, then you need to see a professional. And obviously your helpline and your hotline is very important because you need to make sure that you have a safety plan. It's good to have money in your own bank account if you can. so that you have that rainy day fund and that you can move around if you need to. Make sure that you are not letting yourself be in an unsafe situation. And then I think find a trusted attorney. Find someone that you actually can work with and that you believe is going to advocate for you. And be very honest about this. Sometimes we don't find out about things until way later in the case. And people are not necessarily transparent because they feel shame about it. So be very honest. Your attorney can only help you if you tell them what's going on.
Absolutely. Can you talk for a minute, just a little bit more about this post-nuptial agreement? Yeah.
Sure. So a post-nuptial agreement, so let's just say you didn't have a prenup, or maybe you have a prenup and you now need to renegotiate it in some way. But a post-nuptial agreement is an agreement that you and your spouse come to about what's going to happen in the event of a divorce, or in the event of your death or his death or whoever's death, right? And how assets are going to be divided. So it is essentially, it's very similar to a prenup in that you are planning ahead. You're not necessarily thinking that you're going to get divorced. It's really to enhance your marriage and not to go off and get a divorce tomorrow. But when I say enhance your marriage, it's the transparency that enhances your marriage, right? It is the ability to have these very strong discussions, these very important discussions. My husband and I, we were actually written up in the Wall Street Journal probably about 6 months ago. And the article was actually how do divorce attorneys handle their own finances, right? And and it was a great article, frankly. It was an interesting article because what we were talking about, and we both were on the same page of, is that it's part of our normal conversation to be having a discussion about finances. It's not unusual for us to wake up in the morning and talk about what's in this account or what's in that account or what investment this is or how that's doing. That is part of our discussion, right? And how we are going to spend money or not spend money, what we're going to save for. These are all things that people should be discussing, and they doesn't have to be a specific time each year. It can be part of the normal discussion that you're having.
Yes, absolutely. And another thing I was thinking of that I always mention when I'm talking about divorce and mindset and how women feel about themselves is that many of us have been conditioned as women to think we're not good with math. We're not good with numbers. We can't understand taxes. We can't understand investments. And that's been kind of built into generation after generation of women. So we get to the point we don't even try. What I think I hear you saying is we need to try no matter what, no matter how uncomfortable it is. What are your thoughts around this?
Well, look, I agree with you that women are often told that they don't know anything about money, okay? That they're not in some way smart enough, or that, they shouldn't have taken, they don't need to take math, or they're just going to get married later, or whatever it is, right? But I think women are very, very smart, okay? And I have so many clients who are really, powerful women in the finance world. And it's wrong to be thinking of ourselves in that way. And we need to take control of our finances. And, I put up the organization Savvy Ladies. It's SAVVYLADIES.org. And if you go to that site, then you actually type in your financial question, I believe, and then you're connected to the helpline through that. And they also have an app. NASDAQ has actually helped us put together an app that can be now downloaded onto your phone to make this even easier for you. So that is a great organization to help women empower themselves financially.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything else that I've forgotten to ask, thoughts that you have that you'd like to share
Look,
before we close?
I think generally, Beverly, that women need to think about their professional careers, right? And they need to do so early on, and that if they stay in the workforce, that's going to be a very powerful tool in itself. I see so many women who are financially abused because they have come out of the workforce and they have given up essentially their earning potential. And I am a very big believer that you can't give up that earning potential because you will not be able to get it back.
Absolutely. So if if you don't work outside the home, any particular tips there?
If you don't work outside the home and you don't have a prenup or a postnup, okay, you best make sure that you have actually a spouse who you can really trust. That's the first thing,
Right.
okay? And you need to make sure that you have access to the financial information. And I think if you don't have access to that financial information, then you need to say to yourself that this is a problem and we're going to need to deal with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow, Lisa, you have just shared so much powerful information. I hope that our listeners can soak it all in. It's so good. All of your information is going to be in the show notes, but can you share with our listeners how they can find you?
Absolutely. So they can go to Lisa Zeiderman, LisaZeiderman.com, or they can call me at 914-455-1000, or they can email me at lz@mzw-law.com.
Beautiful. And again, that will be in the show notes so you won't miss a thing. Lisa, thank you so much for being with me today. This has been so informative, and I know it's going to help so many people.
Thank you so much for having me. It was delightful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being with Lisa and I on Her Empowered Divorce Live. With the right support and guidance, you can move through the divorce process with knowledge, skills, and confidence. We help you understand and navigate the process, come to terms with your emotions, avoid costly mistakes, find your true voice, and be empowered. And this is absolutely critical in the areas of financial abuse. Most women have spent a lifetime investing in others while neglecting themselves, and divorce is not the time to do this. Assemble a team before you even talk to your spouse to support you through the decisions that will impact you for a lifetime. If you're interested in learning more, schedule a free consultation at herempowereddivorce.com. And until next time, take care and stay empowered.